Welcome to the talk for our second shared task on multi-hop inference for explanation regeneration. I'm Peter Jansen and I co-ran this task with Dmitry Ustilov. A quick note, due to scheduling difficulties, we only have 15 minutes for this slot this year. So I'd like to note that the full 30-minute version of this talk is available at the link below, and this talk will be a short version of that. In this talk, we're going to quickly look at the following topics. Again, these are discussed in much more detail in the longer talk and certainly in the two shared task papers that we have. So we're going to look at what is multi-hop inference and what is explanation regeneration, which is the topic of this shared task. We're going to see why it's hard, what explanation corpus we used for the shared task, what approaches the participating teams took, how well they did, and where we are and where we're going. So very briefly, my long-term interest is in building systems that are able to answer natural language questions and build detailed human-readable explanations for their answers by aggregating or combining multiple facts together to support that inference. And again, just very briefly, I tend to study these questions in the context of answering standardized science exam questions, which is the domain of this shared task as well. In that domain, we found that it generally takes an average of 6 atomic facts to answer questions and produce a human-readable, detailed explanation for the reasoning behind them. And in some cases, this goes all the way to 16 facts. Unfortunately, right now, it's challenging for models to combine, in general, more than 2 facts successfully a lot of the time, and so we've created this shared task to help make progress on this. So to help ground this task, consider the following question from the New York Regents Science exam. Which of the following is an example of an organism taking in nutrients? The answer is a girl eating an apple. And so rarely with these complex inference questions do we get lucky enough to find a single passage in our corpus that we can just retrieve outright that answers the question. Even if your corpus is the size of the web, this is really unlikely to happen in general. More likely, what we need to do to solve the question while producing an explanation is to aggregate a variety of pieces of information from a variety of sources. So in this case, you need to know that a girl means a human girl and that humans are living organisms. We need to know that eating is when an organism takes in nutrients in the form of food. And we also need to know that apples are a kind of fruit and fruits are foods. And so these sentences that we aggregate together would then form a compelling human-readable justification for why the answer is correct. And this being TextGraphs, many of you have likely recognized that we can frame this as a problem of building a graph of sentences that together form the explanation. Here the connections in the graph are made by lexical overlap, which is basically having shared words between the sentences, but you can imagine constructing graphs of sentences based on different kinds of signals. So if that's multi-hop inference, what's explanation regeneration? Explanation regeneration, as we framed it, is a slightly simplified version of what I've just shown you. Given both the question and the correct answer, can a model build an explanation for why that answer is correct? We see a really short example here. The question is, an animal has 6 legs. What is it most likely to be? The answer is a fly. And the gold 3-fact explanation we have for this in the corpus is a fly is a kind of insect. An insect has 6 legs, and an insect is a kind of animal. Remember, this is generally beyond our abilities to generate in general. Now, this explanation is sort of the cartoon example that fits nicely on a single slide. The explanation is pretty simple. It has only 3 facts. This is an example of another explanation from the Worldtree explanation corpus that contains many more facts. The question is, which of the following characteristics would best help the tree survive the heat of a forest fire? The answer is thick bark. And to answer this question, the central concepts that you need to understand are that bark is a protective covering around a tree and that thick things tend to provide more protection than thin things. But you also need to know sort of a lot more detailed world knowledge that we often don't think about. Things like protecting something means preventing harm, that fire causes harm to living things, that trees are a kind of living thing, and that protecting a living thing helps it survive, and so on. This sort of mix of science knowledge and detailed sort of common sense or world knowledge, enough we sort of hope to make the explanations meaningful to a 5-year-old, is the hallmark of the detailed explanations that are in the Worldtree corpus. One of the major differences between the 2019 shared task and this 2020 shared task is that we have a lot more training and evaluation data. The current corpus contains about 4,400 detailed, manually authored explanations expressed as those sorts of lexically connected explanation graphs. So we have almost 3 times the amount of training data and almost 2 times the size of the knowledge base, so it's considerably harder. I mentioned the explanations are structured. By that I mean each fact in an explanation is expressed as a row in a knowledge base of tables that we call the table store. In total we have 80 tables, each expressing different kinds of knowledge, taxonomic knowledge, parts of, causality, process roles, and so on and so forth. The great thing about this is that each row or each fact can be read off both as plain text or in its structured form. So you can use the same data to compare models that need structured data with models that need free text, which is really nice from a method standpoint. I'll only briefly mention this. One of the unique aspects of this shared task in the Worldtree corpus is the length of the explanations. Nearly every other multi-hop corpus has explanations that require combining only 2 elements together. For example, 2 paragraphs in the case of HotPot QA, or 2 sentences in the case of QASC, which are 2 recent data sets. As we can see here from this histogram, Worldtree requires combining an average of 6 things, in this case sentences, and as many as 16, so the multi-hop problems here are very hard. Also very briefly, because we go into much more detail in the shared task papers, there are a bunch of concurrent challenges that make multi-hop inference hard, with just a couple of them listed here. Semantic drift is the idea that when traversing a graph, or sort of hopping from different facts in the graph, if you want to think of it as multi-hop inference, it's easy to steer off course and hop to irrelevant or incorrect facts. This is related to the idea of long inference chains. The longer your explanations, the more you have to hop, the harder the problem becomes. It might even be exponential, it looks like. There's also a bunch of sort of research methods challenges in multi-hop inference, with a few papers highlighted here. The central idea being that it's very hard to directly measure multi-hop inference and to make sure that a multi-hop model is actually using compositional inference, rather than sort of cheating and going around it by using a strong retrieval model with a very strong corpus behind it. Worldtree helps make evaluating some of these methods problems easier, and it does seem, as these papers show, that a lot of models that claim to be doing multi-hop or compositional inference likely aren't doing as much as they thought, conceivably by a large amount, and so this is a really big issue from a scientific perspective. So a quick overview of the team submissions. To make this shared task accessible to a wide audience, we reframed the explanation regeneration from a graph building task to a re-ranking task. Given the question and the answer, the model has to selectively rank all the facts in the knowledge base such that the facts that are most likely to be in the explanation are ranked highest, and most graph-based methods can sort of be decomposed into this problem or converted back into this problem. It also lets us use standard ranking metrics to evaluate performance, and here we use mean average precision. In total, we had 9 pre-competition submissions this year, or I should say in-competition submissions this year, which doubles the number that we had from last year, so there's a great deal of interest in the task. 5 teams submitted shared task papers that we'll talk about in a second. The overall top performance reached about 0.6 map from the Baidu team, congratulations, with the LIR team squeaking in just behind. The LIR team also, in their shared task paper, reported that they reran last year's best performing model called Chains of Reasoning, and that it gets about 0.5 map performance, so that seems to suggest that this year we've gained about 10% absolute performance, which is really, really fantastic. And of course, the best model is about 2.5 times better than a TF-IDF baseline, which is also really, really good. The teams used a variety of different techniques. I'll just sort of buzz through these for time, but again, more details are in their system description papers as well as the summary paper. The Baidu team used the ERNIE 2.0 language model both as a ranker and a re-ranker, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, has achieved over 90% performance on Glue, so it's a very strong language model. And they use this in a multi-stage pipeline followed by a graph neural network. LIR use an auto-regressive ranker to iteratively build an explanation. They have a full coding paper on this that I'm pretty eager to read. Chi-Square tried out basically most of the major players in the language model arena and found that Roberta tends to perform best as a re-ranker if you're re-ranking TF-IDF ranks. Red Dragon use a combination of an iterative BM25 model and an LSTM interleaved transformer, which sounds very interesting, and also get very near top performance. And the AG team uses integer linear programming to re-rank the top 30 BERT facts. Just like last year, I like to include more detailed measures of performance in the summary paper, specifically related to sort of that methods problem of figuring out how much multi-hop reasoning we're actually doing. Here I'm just going to show one for time. There's more in the shared task papers. As background, explanations contain a variety of different kinds of facts, as you'd expect. Some of them are arguably easier to find for a given model than others. And you might imagine that explanatory facts that have a lot of the same words as the question or the answer, as we see here, might be easiest to find, since a lot of the retrieval methods that we have today are very good at finding these. Here in this figure, we've sort of called these the one-hop easy facts up near the top. Whereas explanatory facts that have only one word in common with the question or answer might be more challenging. We call those one-hop medium. And facts with no words at all in common with the question or answer might be very difficult to find and ostensibly require some sort of multi-hop methods that hop from those easier to find facts to get to these harder facts. And so here we've labeled those the two-hop hard facts. For example, here the question is why does recycling newspapers conserve resources? And here you need to know that a newspaper is made out of paper and that trees are a kind of resource, but also that paper is made out of trees. But that last fact, that paper is made out of trees, is really hard to find because the word paper and the word tree don't occur anywhere in the question or answer. So you have to access that through some other means, ostensibly multi-hop reasoning if you're doing a lexical chain. So what do we actually see? Here's the performance of each team's system broken down by the one-hop easy facts, the one-hop medium facts, and those two-hop hard, ostensibly multi-hop facts. And the short version of this is, even though 4 out of these 5 teams report very similar performance, anywhere between 0.5 and 0.6 map, what we see when we actually break down the performance by how many of these one-hop or two-hop facts they're accessing is that their performance really varies quite wildly. For example, the chi-squared language model's performance on these hard two-hop facts is a map of only 0.07, but it ranges all the way up to 0.31 from the LIR team, a factor of more than 4 difference. So even though the models are scoring very similarly, they're doing very different things under the hood, and arguably some more compositional than others. And so really by drilling down and looking in more detail, we can sort of hope to see the relative benefits and drawbacks for different models in terms of sort of the true compositional inference, to sort of use the language of the papers I mentioned earlier. And so in summary, the participants did great. The participating teams appear to have increased performance by nearly 10% absolute performance compared to last year, which is really remarkable. There's also been lots of improvements in inference speed, which is almost as important when using these systems in any kind of a production environment. It's important to note that while the relative gains are pretty high, the absolute performance still isn't great. There's lots of room to go, especially on sort of many hop problems and finding those multi-hop facts that aren't easily accessible by other means. And as a final note, I'd like to leave you thinking about the research methods problems in multi-hop inference, particularly in the context of evaluation. It's a bit of extra work to include detailed evaluations of multi-hop performance in your papers, though certainly as a plug for Worldtree, Worldtree is designed to be an instrument for multi-hop inference that helps make that kind of analysis easier. But really diving deep into where the multi-hop performance is coming from in our models helps us tease apart sort of the performance of retrieval versus really truly compositional methods that we have. And make much more targeted headway at improving the science of that compositional inference, which is really sort of the story of multi-hop reasoning. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening and thank all the shared task participants. Again, thanks.